On September 26, 1999, in a quiet New Jersey suburb, Gladys Ricart prepared to marry the love of her life. Surrounded by family and friends, the air was filled with laughter, love, and the promise of a bright future. But as the ceremony was about to begin, an uninvited guest arrived, a figure from Gladys's past, carrying a bouquet in one hand and a concealed weapon in the other. In an instant, the joyous occasion turned into a scene of unimaginable horror. What could drive someone to commit such an evil act on a day meant for celebration? What secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of this tragic love story? Join us as we unravel the events leading up to that fateful day, exploring the complex relationships, the warning signs overlooked, and the disturbing aftermath of a wedding day that ended in bloodshed. This is the story of love, obsession, and a wedding day that became a nightmare. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Gladys Ricart, a 39-year-old woman known for her warmth and generosity, had finally found love and was about to embark on a new chapter with James Preston, her devoted fiancé. The two had spent months meticulously planning their wedding, ensuring every detail was perfect. Friends and family gathered to celebrate their union in Ridgefield, New Jersey, on a crisp autumn day in September 1999. But as the guests prepared to toast to their future, the unthinkable happened. Gladys, still glowing in her wedding gown, lay lifeless, gunned down in her own living room just hours before she could say, "I do." This wasn't just a case of cold-blooded murder. It was a crime steeped in obsession, betrayal, and a shocking act of violence that left one person dead, another in handcuffs, and a community in disbelief. What makes this case stand apart is not just the brutality of the act, but the relationship at the center of it. A story of love that turned deadly. A betrayal that left devastating consequences. By the end of this video, we'll uncover the harrowing truth about what happened to Gladys Ricart on her wedding day and the chain of events that led to her tragic death. We'll examine the man responsible, the signs that were ignored, and the justice, or lack thereof, that followed. Stay with us as we piece together the story of a wedding that ended before it could even begin. Ridgefield, New Jersey, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. It was a tight-knit community where the news of a wedding was met with excitement and anticipation, especially when it involved someone as beloved as Gladys Ricart. Gladys Ricart was known for her bright smile, her kindness, and her dedication to her family. Originally from the Dominican Republic, she had built a life for herself in the United States, working hard to provide for her young son, Yoshi. By all accounts, Gladys had an energy that drew people to her, someone who deserved every ounce of happiness coming her way. In 1998, Gladys met James Preston, a charismatic and successful entrepreneur. Their connection was immediate. Friends recall how the two seemed inseparable from the start, sharing dreams of building a life together. For Gladys, James represented stability, love, and a fresh start.
When they were together, you could just see how happy she was. She finally found someone who treated her the way she deserved.
As their relationship blossomed, the couple began planning their dream wedding, a ceremony that would celebrate not just their union, but the love and support of the friends and family who had stood by them. Gladys poured her heart into every detail of the day, ensuring it was perfect. The flowers, the venue, the dress. It was all a reflection of her hopes for the future. The wedding was to take place in her home, a symbol of the love she had worked so hard to nurture. Friends and family from near and far arrived, eager to witness the joyful celebration. But while Gladys and James were preparing for their future, someone from her past had other plans. What no one could have predicted was that this idyllic setting, filled with laughter and love, would soon become the scene of a horrific crime that no one would ever forget. The stage was set, the guests had arrived, but the happiness of this day would soon be shattered, leaving a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions. But just as the celebrations were about to begin, a figure from Gladys's past walked into her home with a terrifying purpose. What happened next would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. September the 26th, 1999 began as a picture-perfect day for Gladys Ricart and James Preston. Friends and family gathered at Gladys's Ridgefield, New Jersey home, ready to celebrate a love story that had brought so much joy to everyone around them. Gladys was radiant in her white gown, a vision of happiness as she posed for photographs with her bridal party. The atmosphere was one of pure excitement and love. Everything was running smoothly, the final touches in place for a ceremony that promised to be unforgettable. But amidst the joy, there was an uninvited guest making his way to the house, a man who had once been a central figure in Gladys's life. Agustin Garcia, her ex-boyfriend, was a man she had known for years. Their relationship had ended months earlier, a decision that Gladys had made in pursuit of her own happiness.
She wanted to move on. She wanted to be happy.
Garcia, however, wasn't ready to let go. Friends would later recall how he struggled with the breakup, making multiple attempts to reconcile. On this day, his desperation reached a breaking point. At around 11 a.m., as guests mingled and Gladys prepared for her big moment, Garcia entered the house. He was holding a bouquet of red roses, a seemingly innocent gesture that hid a deadly intent. He made his way through the home, moving with purpose. Those who saw him assumed he was delivering flowers, a kind gesture for the bride. But then, without warning, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a .38 caliber revolver. In the middle of the living room, in front of her friends and family, Garcia pointed the gun at Gladys and fired 3 shots. The room erupted into chaos. Guests screamed, dove for cover, and watched in horror as Gladys collapsed to the floor, still wearing her wedding dress. Witnesses described the scene as surreal, one moment filled with joy, the next consumed by terror. Some tried to intervene, but it was too late. Gladys lay motionless, her life taken in an instant. In the immediate aftermath, Garcia stood in the room, surrounded by shocked and grieving onlookers. It wasn't until one brave guest subdued him and others called 911 that the nightmare finally ended.
Call the police.
When police arrived, Garcia didn't resist arrest. He was calm, almost eerily so, as he was handcuffed and taken away. The scene he left behind was devastating. A bride dressed for her dream wedding, now surrounded by bloodstains and broken dreams. What could drive someone to commit such an act of violence on the happiest day of someone else's life? And how could this tragedy have been prevented? The answers would only come with time, as the community struggled to make sense of what had happened. But as investigators began piecing together the events of that day, they uncovered a history of obsession, warning signs, and heartbreak that painted a terrifying picture of what led Agustin Garcia to commit murder. The murder of Gladys Ricart on her wedding day sent shockwaves through Ridgefield, New Jersey and beyond. Investigators were immediately called to the scene, but what they encountered was a situation far more complex than they initially anticipated. When authorities arrived, the scene was chaotic. Wedding guests were in shock, some sobbing uncontrollably, while others struggled to make sense of what had just happened. With over a dozen witnesses present, investigators had plenty of people to interview, but their accounts varied widely. Some described hearing Garcia and Gladys arguing before the shooting, while others claimed he didn't say a word. The emotional state of the witnesses made it difficult for investigators to piece together a clear timeline of events. And in the midst of the panic, crucial details may have been overlooked. Adding to the challenge was the lack of immediate forensic evidence. The crime happened in a crowded living room, with countless fingerprints, footprints, and other potential contaminants making it hard to isolate anything specific to Garcia. While Agustin Garcia was the obvious suspect, having been subdued at the scene holding the weapon, investigators needed to determine his motive. Was this an act of pure rage? Or was it something premeditated, calculated to ensure Gladys never made it to the altar?
We knew Garcia was involved, but the question was, why? What was his state of mind leading up to that moment?
The investigation quickly turned to Gladys's past relationship with Garcia. Friends and family revealed that the couple had dated for several years before breaking up months prior. While their relationship had been passionate, it was also described as tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments. Gladys had ended the relationship, hoping to start anew with James Preston, but Garcia wasn't ready to let go. Friends reported that he continued to contact her, showing up uninvited and sending messages begging for another chance. To some, his behavior was obsessive. To others, it was the desperate actions of a man unable to move on. As investigators dug deeper, several key pieces of evidence began to emerge. The first was the weapon itself, a .38 caliber revolver. Ballistics confirmed it was the firearm used in the murder, and Garcia's fingerprints were found on the handle. But perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence came from a journal found in Garcia's apartment. In it, he had written extensively about his heartbreak over the breakup, his anger at Gladys, and, most disturbingly, his belief that if he couldn't have her, no one else should.
We found Garcia's journal during the investigation, and what we read painted a disturbing picture of his state of mind, saying, "She betrayed me. She chose him over me. I'll never let her walk away from me again."
Investigators also uncovered phone records showing that Garcia had called Gladys several times in the days leading up to the wedding. Witnesses reported seeing him driving by her house in the weeks prior, raising the question, had he been planning this all along? Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store revealed Garcia purchasing the roses he brought to the wedding, just hours before the murder. To detectives, it was clear. This was no spontaneous act of rage, it was premeditated. With the evidence mounting against Garcia, investigators prepared their case. But even as the pieces began to fit together, one question lingered. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Had the warning signs been ignored, or was this an inevitable act of violence driven by obsession?
We had a man with a clear motive, a history of possessive behavior, and evidence that pointed to a deliberate plan. But the biggest question was, why didn't anyone see this coming?
The investigation had uncovered Garcia's motive and a horrible level of planning. But the breakthrough came when one witness revealed a crucial piece of information that would change everything. What they said would leave even seasoned detectives stunned. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to Gladys Ricart's tragic murder, the case seemed to hinge on the obvious suspect, Agustin Garcia. But then, a witness came forward with new information, a revelation that added yet another layer of complexity to the story. One of the guests at the wedding, a close friend of Gladys, shared something they had been hesitant to disclose. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, they'd noticed Garcia parked near Gladys's home multiple times, watching the house for hours. At the time, they brushed it off as coincidence. But in hindsight, it painted a picture of a man obsessed with his former partner. The witness also mentioned an interaction with Garcia at a mutual friend's gathering. Garcia had reportedly spoken about Gladys in a way that unsettled them. He referred to her upcoming wedding as a betrayal and implied that she didn't deserve to walk down the aisle with another man.
He kept saying, "She'll regret it." At the time, we thought he was just venting.
This testimony, combined with Garcia's journal entries, suggested a clear pattern of stalking and escalating anger. But the most incriminating detail came from forensic analysis of the crime scene. Investigators discovered that the revolver Garcia used had been purchased weeks before the wedding. The receipt, found in his apartment, showed he had not only bought the gun, but also practiced at a nearby shooting range. This was no heat-of-the-moment decision, it was premeditation.
The purchase of the weapon and his preparation showed us this was planned long before the wedding day.
As the case unfolded, another motive emerged, a deeply personal and possessive one. Garcia, it seemed, viewed Gladys not as a former partner, but as someone who owed him loyalty. Their breakup, in his mind, was an affront to his pride. Witnesses described him as a man who could not tolerate rejection, especially when it came to a woman he once claimed to love. One friend revealed that Garcia had once told them, "If I can't have her, no one will." These words, chilling in retrospect, painted a picture of a man consumed by control and rage. On the day of the murder, Garcia was apprehended at the scene by wedding guests and handed over to the police. He did not resist arrest. Witnesses described him as calm, almost eerily so, as officers led him away.
He didn't fight. He didn't even look angry. It was like he knew this would happen.
Garcia was charged with first-degree murder, and prosecutors wasted no time in building their case against him. The evidence was overwhelming. The pre-purchase of the gun, the journal entries, and the witness testimonies all pointed to one conclusion. This was an act of calculated revenge. As news of the murder spread, the community was left reeling. Gladys Ricart had been a beloved figure, and the brutal nature of her death shook everyone who knew her. Vigils were held in her memory, with friends and family mourning not only the loss of her life, but also the dreams she never got to fulfill. For many, Garcia's actions were incomprehensible. How could a man who once professed to love Gladys take her life in such a cruel and public way? As the trial approached, all eyes were on the court to see if justice would be served.
Gladys didn't deserve this. She deserved a life full of happiness. We just hope she gets justice.
But as the trial began, Garcia's defense team presented a surprising argument, one that would force the court to grapple with questions of intent, mental state, and the true definition of justice. The trial of Agustin Garcia began in 2002, 3 years after the murder of Gladys Ricart. It was a case that captivated not only Ridgefield, New Jersey, but the entire nation. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, and media eager to see justice served. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence against Garcia. The journal entries, the revolver purchase, and witness testimonies all painted a clear picture of premeditation. They argued that Garcia's actions on Gladys's wedding day were calculated, fueled by jealousy and an inability to accept her moving on.
This was not an act of passion. This was a man who planned to kill the woman he claimed to love, simply because she chose to live her life without him.
The defense, however, argued that Garcia's actions were the result of an emotional breakdown. They claimed he had been deeply hurt by Gladys's decision to marry another man, and that his actions, while tragic, were not premeditated murder, but a crime of passion.
Agustin Garcia was a man in emotional turmoil, blinded by pain. This was not a calculated act, but a moment of uncontrollable rage.
The emotional testimonies from Gladys's family and friends moved the courtroom to tears. Her son, Yoshi, now a teenager, spoke about the loss of his mother and the future they would never share.
She was the best mom anyone could ask for. She deserved to be happy. She didn't deserve this.
After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for several days. On July 26, 2002, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Garcia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. A sentence that brought some measure of relief to Gladys's loved ones, but could never undo the pain of her loss. For Gladys's family, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. They found solace in the fact that justice had been served, but the void left by her absence could never be filled. Her son Yoshi, raised by family members, carried his mother's memory with him as he grew into adulthood. In the years following her death, friends and family held annual vigils to honor Gladys's life and raise awareness about domestic violence and the warning signs of obsessive behavior. Her story became a symbol of resilience, reminding others to seek help and speak out against abuse. As for Agustin Garcia, he remains incarcerated, his life defined by the choices he made that fateful day. The community he left behind still struggles to understand how love could lead to such a devastating act. For the people of Ridgefield, the memory of Gladys Ricart lives on, not as a victim but as a woman whose joy and spirit were taken too soon, yet continue to inspire those who remember her.
She was full of life, full of love. That's how we choose to remember her. Not for what happened, but for who she was.
Though justice was served, the tragedy of Gladys Ricart reminds us all of the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession and violence. Her story is one that will never be forgotten. If this story gripped you as much as it did us, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from our channel. We bring you the most compelling true crime stories that deserve to be remembered and shared. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this case. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or were the warning signs ignored for too long? Let us know in the comments below. We value your insights and theories. Thank you for watching, and remember, every story has a lesson, and every voice has the power to make a difference. Until next time, stay safe.